I guess, but it's kind of echo.
Gentlemen, do you want to follow in the text? It's up to you. If you do, we're going to take a look at page 69. And we're going to speak about the Godel, Tzitzis, the size of the Beged, and Ituf, covering page 69. Now, right now, I'm putting on hold a number of different discussions, which I hope we'll get back to. For example, what happens if you have a beggar that has only 3 corners and not 4? What if you have 5 corners or more? We're going to talk about putting tzitzis on an undershirt and what's called a big day zeo, let's say something you use during sports and you sweat a lot in it. And we're going to talk about different various cases of begodim that you potter from tzitzis. For example, synthetics is a whole issue. Let's say you have polyester begodim and so forth. So all this Mirza Hashem will get to, but I would like to get to a chapter here, which we're almost up to, and that is the bracha on the tzitzis. And we'll talk about the talis gadol and the ituf and the talis katan. So looking here at the Godel, we have a brisa in Masechta Menachos on Daf Mem. And the brisa says, talis shakatan miskasebo rosho verubo v'agodel agadol yotze bo derech haroy chayeves b'tzitzis. In other words, it's a small beged, and it's enough to cover, let's say, most of the body of a child, but not an adult. But nevertheless, an adult wouldn't be embarrassed to wear it on a temporary basis. And Rashi says, "V'agadol yotze ba aroy." Rashi says, "She'eno bosh lotzeis bo lashuk." So we have now basically 2 definitions. We have a definition of a katan is miskasebo rosho verubo, and we have another definition that a gadol is not embarrassed to wear it at least on a temporary basis. And the question is whether these 2 definitions are really one definition, and the very fact that a katan could cover most of his body, that by definition tells me that a gadol would wear it. And if that be the case, then we're really talking about something objective.
So you have to be dignified enough.
Correct. It's got to be a dignified beged.
Enough to go out.
Enough, at least you go out on a temporary basis. So the Torah writes in Orach Chaim Simon Tes Zayin that what is the minimum size of a beged to be chayav in tzitzis? And he adds, Kol shekotem ben teisha, he's 9 years old, he could cover rosho verubo. V'gadol eno misbayish lotzes bo biakroy on a temporary basis l'shuk. So it means that according to the Torah, these are 2 identical definitions. And how are you? And once we have a beged that a child would go out at the age of 9 and he would cover most of his body, then that's enough to be considered that a gadol would not be embarrassed to walk with it. However, if it's a small beged, so small that even a 9-year-old child would not wear it to cover his body, then even if the gadol goes out, says the Torah, on a temporary basis, and he's not embarrassed, it's what you call batla daito etzel kol adam, which is a halachic principle that tells me that we don't define the halacha by subjective terms, but rather by objective terms. What that means is, like, let's say you lose something on the bottom of the sea, and it's a very small object. There's like no one, except for maybe a deep sea diver, that could possibly, even then it's almost impossible. He says, no, I don't give up hope. I don't despair. I'm going to find it. So that's called batla daito etzel kol adam. We have an objective situation here where the object is lost. It's called zuto shel yam. It's on the bottom of the sea. And it's avuda mimenim kol adam. It's completely lost from everyone. He comes along and he says, well, I'm the guy who says, I have faith. I'm going to find it. I'm going to dive down. We don't go by his subjective definition, but rather by the objective definition. So we have a very small talis here that wouldn't even cover the body of a 9-year-old child. And he says, you know what? I don't mind. I'll put it around this way. I'll put it around that way. The Torah says he's potter min hatzitzis. And if you take a look at the commentary here, he writes that Habeis Yosef Hevi is Divrei Mari Ibn Chaviv. Okay, this is one of the greats of the, 6 centuries ago. And he says, based on the Rambam, that there's only one condition. We really could reduce the whole definition of a beged l'tzitzis and the size of the beged to one definition. Can a 9-year-old child cover most of his body? Once we reach that level, we're not going to ask the second question, would a gadol, a more mature person, ever wear such a small beged? Because we're going to assume, as an objective standard, says Mari Ibn Chaviv, that in most cases, a gadol would be willing to go out with such a talis, at least on a temporary basis. So we have here an objective definition, which is that a cotton is miskasa most of his body.
It doesn't sound objective to me because kids are different sizes.
Well, no, we're going to take the average size of a 9-year-old and we're going to figure out exactly, how much of his body would be covered. And if you come along and you say, well, I wouldn't wear it, or I would wear even something smaller, no. The halacha is going to decide whether you're chayav or not.
Rosho Barubo means that it's on his head and it's bigger than just robe.
Correct. He's a 9-year-old boy. Let's say he's, shall we say he's 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall. I don't know how tall he is. And most of his body could be covered by this talus. And we're going to have different, as we'll soon see, different opinions. You'll have Reb Chaim Noah, and you'll have the Chazon.
Were considered different. What was respectable?
Yeah, it's very interesting that the halacha determines objectively what's considered something that a person would not be embarrassed to wear, even though, like you say, maybe society would change.
Right. In other words, the Rosh Barubo is also like by Sukkah, we say Rosh Barubo, but most things are given objective numerical definition. I would think, but here, what?
A lot of times you just have what's considered the norm.
Right. No. So when you have like an amma, which is a you have in halakha things that are numerical definitions.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are just objective.
That's what I was going to. Right. So I was going to say is when we're talking about a beged, by definition, it has to be non-objective.
No, there's no mention of hair right there for like to be not
I understand,
objective, but
but
it's like this is the mention of
it
sounds like a mention of like what's really like what people wear is clothes. Consider clothes in a general sense.
But it's different than like saying your reviews, or it doesn't. Rosh Barubo doesn't sound like an objective determination. I don't know.
Well, that's right, maybe precisely the point. Rosh Barubo, and that's why probably they said the second part to say that it really means.
Okay, though. Now, what I want to study with you here is on page 70. Do you have that page 70?
And not everyone the same way.
He says the following, that the Rambam only quotes this one standard in determining how large the beged is, namely, it's katan miskasaba. Now, the strange thing is that although the Shulchan Aruch only quotes that one requirement, that one standard, the Ramah, as he comments, adds the fact that Gadol Lovsho Ha'amim Aroi. And we understand, as we'll soon see from the Ramah, that he understood that there were 2 conditions that have to be met. There are 2 standards. One standard is that a cotton would cover most of his body, and another is that a gadol would be willing, on certain occasions at least, on a aroi, to wear such a beged. It's meaningful.
It should be meaningful thinking about it because the mitzvah is on the beged, not necessarily the person wearing it. And what is considered a beged proper for an adult to wear? That's where we're going at. I mean, if it's proper for adult to wear, it's a minimal thing an adult will wear.
Right. So let's take a look. Excuse me, at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says Shir Tal Shechai B'Tzitzis Kasev Ba'Orech B'Rochav Rosho B'Ruba Shel Katan, and that's it. The Ramah adds Dafka Kshagadol Lovsho Pa'amim Aroi V'Yotzi Bo L'Shuk. So it could be that the Ramah has a different size of a beged because he adds a second condition. And the Mishnah Berurah writes that Ube'inyan shir rosho v'rubo minag anshe masa l'dagdik sheyirbo ama milafanov v'ama miliachrov. Now again, we have to determine how much is an amma, how large is an amma.
Why is the shear based on a katan? Was not even chayiv? It should be based on a gadol for defining a beged that you're chayiv. A katan is not chayiv yet.
Right, but the very fact that a katan
That
could,
would define it as a beged, but.
right, the fact that a katan,
But if it's not defined as a beged.
No, that's no fine, it has to be
It's-
defined as a bag. It's defined as a bag because it's meant for a katan. But it's the
Right.
minimal that an adult would wear in the case of emerging is on a regular basis.
It doesn't. You take pajamas for a 2-year-old, you call that a beged? I mean, it's a beged for a 2-year-old, it's not a beged that you should put tzitzis on.
I
Because
know, you're not gonna do it, but in case you need like.
now the shear of a katan of bentes is relevant to many halachas, some of which are doraisa and some of the rabbanan. For example, if a katan bentes would have a relationship with a married woman, then all the repercussions would be there. Or for example, if a bentes has beer with a shivcha charuf, he has to bring a korban asham. And not only that, the shear of chinuch in general is a katan bentes for most mitzvahs, not all mitzvahs. So that that a katan bentes is already a bardas, we have to be mechanichim, and it seems quite significant that this beged would cover most of his body. And it's one amma by one amma. What do you say?
Makes a lot of sense. That would be the smallest tzitzis that are typically around because that's when.
So how much is an amma by an amma?
We're
See-
talking about width or over the shoulder is an amma.
Right. Yeah, he says you don't have to subtract the base hatzavor, the opening where he puts his head in. Okay then? So now take a look at the Alkut Yosef. You have that on the bottom right? This is Ravad Yosef. He writes, L'chatchila ein levarech al talis katan. Elim kein yesh bo kishir shtei amos orech al ama rochak. So he's quoting another shita. Now, if you see the small print before number 7, he quotes Reb Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish. And he says the following, that according to the Grach Noah, it seems all you need is 36 centimeters, which is probably something like maybe less than 24 inches. And yet, according to the Chazon Ish, you need 46 centimeters. That's a whole lot more.
Wait a second, on each side? So if it was open, you need 90, or it's open, you need 36 or 45?
No, he's saying that you would need 36 going up and down and 36 going in this direction. In other words, vertically and horizontally. But that's according to the Grach Noah. So you're already making a bracha on tzitzis that's only 36 centimeters. But the Alkud Yosef writes, "Chatchila ein levarech al talis katan, elim kein yesh bo kishir shtei amos orach." Wow, that's a whole different shear. Apparently, he's adding another condition here. It's not enough that you can cover the body of a katan, and therefore he needs an orach of tishim v'shisha centimeters al ama rochav, which is 45 centimeters. Now, I'm not sure
Must
if
be open.
I'm not sure if he's going beyond the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish only required 45 centimeters. And Rav Avad Yosef is saying that in the Amar Rochav, you need 48 centimeters. And not only that, in the Orech, that means up and down, you're going to require Tishim Veshisha centimeters.
It's an alma on each side.
Milvada nekir.
Wow. I mean, that's a whole different psak. And therefore, if you take a look at the Piskei Tshuvas, which is on page 71, he writes, Harotza Lotzesi, they call it Deos. Okay, somebody wants to fulfill all the opinions because he wants to make a bracha, he doesn't want to get into it in a safek. So therefore, he says, Yakfid al Orech Verochav, 58 al 58. That sounds awfully similar to Rav Avad Yosef. Rav Avad Yosef had 48, now he's up to 58. And V'chein 58 al 58 said to Mizrach Chorov. Wow. And then he goes on and he says, let's round it off. Head to number 60. So you need 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters. And only then you are Yotze all the days. Mekel Bashir 44 centimeters, Orach V'chol Tzad al 58 centimeters Rochav, Yesh al mi lismach le'inyan bracha. Okay, fine.
We've got a long way from the child.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
We started with 36 and then we went up to 45 and then we took a jump to 48 and now we're up to 58. But what I do want to point out is the next section. That's what we really wanted to focus our attention on. Seder Adifas Hatalis. He quotes the Tur, Yeshlis Atif B'tzitzis Ba'amida. Now that's probably an application of a universal rule that until there's an exception to the rule, we do a mitzvah in a standing position. The question is about tefillin. We're going to see that tefillin is the exception to the rule, and the Beis Yosef is going to paskin that tefillin you wear when you're sitting, but talis you wear when you're standing. Now the question that I had is, does that halach apply even to a talis katan, or it's only to a talis gadol? It doesn't seem that he's making any distinctions. And the Torah wants you to, the first thing you do after you wash your hands is you wrap yourself up in the talis for taima. Beis Yosef is the super commentator on the Torah. Mishum de Gomar lachem misfiras omer d'chsibei kama bakama. Right? It says hachel bakama, and bakama Chazal interpret to mean bakoma, so that Sfiras HaOmer becomes the paradigm of a mitzvah, and it requires that you fulfill the mitzvah be'amida. So the Beis Yosef is learning that the requirement of the Torah to stand when you put on the talis is part of a universal halacha that applies to all mitzvahs and derived from the paradigmic case of Sfiras HaOmer. And now we can turn to page 72. Now the Rosh asks the following question: V'chi mevarchim me'umad t'tanu rabbanan. Not only should you wrap yourself in the talis while you're standing, but you also should be making the bracha while you're standing. And that makes sense because the bracha is attached to the ma'aseh mitzvah. The ma'aseh mitzvah is fulfilled while you're standing. Bakoma, t'tanu rabbanan bakoma. Techel ispar al tikri bekoma ela bekoma, and bekoma ela bekoma. So it means that the source for standing when you wrap yourself in the talis is the parsha of Sfiras HaOmer, of counting the Omer. But yet, in the parsha of Tzitzis, it says v'hoyel lachem l'tzitzis, and there's a gzeira shava between Sfiras HaOmer and Tzitzis. Why? Because of the word lachem. It says vayol lachem l'tzitzis. Let's underline the word lachem. And in the parsha of Sfiras HaOmer it says usfartem lachem. So therefore, just like in Sfiras HaOmer we have the word bakama, and that means that you should be standing when you count the Omer. So too, there's a requirement of amida when you do the ituf b'tzitzis. And therefore, if you're standing when you put on the tzitzis, then you should be making the bracha while you're standing. Kechol birchas ha-mitzvah shetzorech le'omer b'amida. So every mitzvah, unless it's an exceptional case, requires amida, and the bracha, which is attached to the asiyah, also requires that we do it in a standing position. However, the Mishnah Berurah points out that b'di'eved, if let's say he puts on his tzitzis when he's sitting, or he makes the bracha when he's sitting, that's fine. L'chatchila, we need standing, but b'di'eved, yatza, he fulfills his mitzvah, he fulfills his ituf b'tzitzis, and he is yotze the mitzvah even the yeshiva.
What would be the havamina not to stand if we say standard is?
Well, again, how do we know that Sfiras HaOmer is the standard? I would have said that Omer, right, it's only because of the Gzeira Shava. Before the Gzeira Shava, lachem lachem, we thought that Sfiras HaOmer is unique because a person wants to count, let's say according to the Sefer HaChinuch, he's counting, his accomplishments each day and he gets closer to Har Sinai, etc., etc. So when a person counts his accomplishments, he does it be'amida, he's proud. But how do we know that this is the paradigmic mitzvah for all mitzvahs that we require amida? That's based on the lachem, the Gzeira Shava to tzitzis. Omar Shmuel, the Gemara Moikot and Daf Chav Dalet. Kol atifa sheina katifas ishmelim eina atifa. And what is atifas ishmelim? Machvi le Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman made a sign, and he indicated al gove dikna. It has to be over the head. And the Tur quotes two interpretations. In Orach Chaim Siman Ches, the Tur writes that in the name of the Gaonim, atifas ishmelim yishiyeh atifa gemura. That means to completely wrap himself with the talus. However, he quotes another opinion of the Bala Itur, also one of the great Rishonim, that lo be'inin kulei high. He shouldn't go that far. When a person goes to work, and let's say he wants to cover his body and it's cold, but he's not going to wrap himself completely around, he's going to only put it over his head. And therefore, he says that he might cover his head, he might not cover his head, but both are acceptable. So that whereas the Gaonim interpret that you must have an atifa gemura that covers his entire head, the shita of the Bala Itur is that it's enough that he covers his body, because sometimes a person doesn't usually necessarily cover the head. So this is a tremendous machlokas, and if you take a look here on page 74, the Shulchan Aruch writes that Seder Adifa Kederech B'nei Adam Shemiskasim B'Ksusam V'Oskim B'Mlachtam, and therefore he allows Pa'amim B'Kisi Arosh, Pa'amim B'Gili Arosh. Now, I'm not sure what the Shulchan Aruch means over here. We're going to have to look into the Mishnah Berurah. There's some ambiguity here in the writings of the Shulchan Aruch, because on the one hand he says that sometimes you cover your head and sometimes you don't cover your head. But then he writes, "V'nochon she's kase rosho betalos." So the Mishnah Berurah says the following: "Bisatu b'tzitzis, pirusho his atfus haguf." So what does it mean to cover and wrap the body? Mitzad echad, you might mean that you don't have to cover your head; you just have to cover your body. But on the other hand, if you don't cover your head, let's say he would imagine covering his head without covering the body. The says the Mishnah Berurah, so that's what the Shulchan Aruch meant when he said Pa'amim B'Gili Arash, that he covers his body, and that's itself an ituf. And that's the Ikar ituf. But over drachim shemenichim atalis shumakupal u'mishalshalim sviv tzavarim al kisveim, if he only covers his head and he wraps the talis around his head, but it's not covering his body, then he says ein yotzim yedei chovas tzitzis bazeh devechaygavnu lekulialma lav itufu. So this concept of ituf requires a lot more study. It's not enough that he covers his head. He has to cover his body. And there are two opinions as to whether covering your body without covering your head is sufficient. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to advocate that Meikar Adin, he needs ituf even over his head and his body. He's going to need a double ituf around his head and around his body. So if you take a look here on page 75.
So what that means is it's sort of rough. Not the whole time, like you're talking the whole time.
Right. This is at the time of the bracha, because the mitzvah, the ma'aseh mitzvah on which he makes a bracha is on Ituv, and he talks about the nusach habracha here. Now, interesting that the Mishnah Berurah on the top, page 75, in a very atypical way, gives you like a musar shmuk, so a little bit of machshava here. He says, Kisui zeh, what is Ituf? What's the purpose of Ituf? Machnia lev ha'adam, this is very reminiscent of what we discussed about tefillin. That tefillin is meant to uplift you to a kedusha like the tzitz, and you're surrounded by, the Shem Hashem on top and the Shem Hashem on the bottom. And here also in tzitzis, he wants an ituf that brings him to the state of what? Of yiras shamayim. Because of abach, shetzorech sheyehei atalos al rosho. Wow, listen to the Bach. Mitchilas atfila ad sofa. Now, I don't know what he means by tchilas atfila. Does he mean Shmona Esrei? Does he mean Kriyat Shema? Does he mean Psuket Zimra, or all the above? Val Kol Panim, Yamod Kach Me'utaf Lefachos Kedei Hiluch Arba Amos. You'll see some people, they'll cover themselves with the talis and immediately uncover themselves. And you need at least Kedei Hiluch Arba Amos, which is probably 2 seconds, but at least you need those 2-3 seconds. Some people, Chabadnikim, for example, will walk 4 Amos with the Ituf to make sure that they fulfill this requirement.
So it sounds like we're already in a time when the tzitzis wasn't your just main guard that you just wore all the time. It sounds like it's like tefillah time.
Correct.
There's
Absolutely.
been some kind of transition.
I never thought about that, Daniel. Maybe you're right. Maybe back in the day they wore the tzitzis and the ituf the whole day. In other words, they didn't. That's the way they walked
I
around,
mean, maybe in the Gaon time too, it's Gei Shmali,
right?
just walking around.
And that's why he says, like when he does his malacha, sometimes he covers his head, sometimes he doesn't cover his
I
head.
thought the Yishmael was just the wrapping.
It is, but I'm just saying, but why would they use Yishmaelim as a model if that wasn't what they normally wear?
Correct. And we'll see soon that Rav Yosef is very makpid that he shouldn't overdo it. Some people, when they cover, they can't even see anything through their eyes. And Rav is very makpid on that because he says Atifas Yishleim didn't mean that they cover their eyes and they would stumble on them.
Make sure to whip the guy in back of them.
Probably. Yeah. You remind me of Rabbi Yisrael Salanto. They asked him, what kapeda should I have when I put on my talis? He said, make sure you don't hit the guy next to you.
When I was in YU, the Chazan, they all insisted that the Chazan had to wear the talis over his head. They said that was the minhag of the Rav. Does that have to do with din with because of the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that Hashem, like the Tzibor, wrapped himself in the talis, or is that Shlichos?
I always thought that's his din in Shlichos, but
because in YU, I remember davening mincha, and there was an elder fellow, he used to always come over, I don't remember his name, said the Rav said, if you're the chazan, you have to always have the talis in your head, from Ashrei to the end, or
including Psuket Zimra.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe that's what the Bach means when he says Mitchilas HaTfilah Vad Sofa, but he's not referring to the shots necessarily.
Yeah.
So Rav Yosef says the following: Lachar shenis atef betalis gadol v'shas habracha, v'kisas rosho, v'akach horido al gufo, rashaylo horido al ksefo, b'zman atfilah. So he's not accepting the Bach right now. Umikol makom nachon lechasos rosh harosh betalis ad sof atfilah. It's very interesting. On the one hand, he's not requiring it. He allows you to, to lower your towels from your head. But on the other hand, even though he allows it, he seems to recommend, Nachon recommended that he should cover his head with the towels for the entire tefillah. But some had the minhag, and this was my minhag always, that only when you get to Baruch Hu, he says Yotzer Or. I don't know why Yotzer Or. This I never figured out. Likras Kabolas Ol Malchus Shmai B'Kriyas. It's like the last bracha, or shall we say the next to the last bracha, before Kriyat Shema. So I guess he's saying that we have 2 brachas before Kriyat Shema, and both of them require a what's the word I'm looking for? A preparation for Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim. So how do we prepare for Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim? By putting our talis over the head. And you can put this together, what we saw in the Mishnah Berurah about Yiras Shamayim. You want to be in that state of being of the fear of heaven. V'rabim noagim la'atef es rosham b'tfilah shmona esrei v'chein roy linog. I'm not sure what he means here, v'chein roy linog, but I guess he means in addition to whatever, you don't want to accept, let's say, those minhagim that go beyond, but at least the basic requirement or the objective requirement should be at least for tefillah shmona esrei. Yesh l'tzayin sheminhag Teiman, yesh l's'atei b'talis kasher kol haknofos nimtzos mikadima. Now, I don't know. I find that a little difficult because the Gaon says that for talis you have to have two in front and two in the back. I find it kind of paradoxical that at the time of Ituv, you're being mavatal the mitzvah of tzitzis because you're putting all four tzitzis up front. Yesh l'sati b'talis kasher kol haknofos nimtzos mikadima.
They sit like that the whole time. They're all four, that's how they do it.
I just don't understand.
What-
I guess they never accepted the Gaon. The
Yeah,
Gaon
they
says
never
you need two
followed
in
it.
front and two in the back.
What would be the status of a, not exact, I don't know, is it still considered polished cotton if there was a big rope that goes over your head? And it goes all the way to your feet, would that considered a tallis or tallis katan? And if so, where when you say?
What, it covers your entire body?
Yeah, like a rope, like a classic rope.
Right,
It
so
goes-
why would that be called the talis cotton?
I don't know, because it's not
You're
like,
asking if you had.
You don't,
because it's not, it's how do you like wear it? Like,
Oh, you don't do
you
etuv
don't,
on it.
yeah, but what kind of etuv is this? It was just putting it on your body is.
Right.
I saw-
If the nafkamina between
No,
talis
you're right,
gadol and
you
talis
said-
cotton is just etuf, then if he's not doing etuf, then by definition it becomes a talis cotton, no matter what size it is. Okay, Rabbi, so let's talk a little bit about synthetics and the like. So for that, we'll have to turn back to, I think it's page 37. Let's see if I'm right. No, not 37. But rather. Yeah, let's start on 38. Do you have page 38? The Gemara in Menachos Taflametesam and Beis Kotzam Achloges between Rabbi Yehuda and Amar Racham Rabbi Yehuda Chutei Tzemetish. Just one second. Upliga de Rav Nachman. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that any material is considered a beged as far as tzitzis is concerned. Tzemer upishtan have a unique status because they can patter up anything. It's like a joker card, a wild card. But the premise of Rabbi Yehuda seems to be that you're chayav in tzitzis even on, let's say, a beged that's made of silk. But the tzitzis themselves could be of tzemer or pishtan. Rav Nachman says that if you have a beged that's not made of tzemer or pishtan, but rather it's made of silk, then you're potter from the mitzvah of tzitzis. And how does Rav Nachman arrive at this conclusion? Because the Torah commands us in tzitzis in two different parashas. One is in the parsha of Shlach, correct, of Shlach, and the other one is the parsha of Ki Tetzei. In the parsha of Ki Tetzei, it says Gedilim Tasa Lecha. It says the Isser of Kilayim Tsemru Pishtan Yachta. So we have a hekesh, according to Rav Nachman, based on a brayso of Rabbi Shmuel, between the Isser of Kilayim and the mitzvah of tzitzis. And since the Isser of Kilayim, the Torah says explicitly, is limited to Tzemer Ufishtan, therefore, the mitzvah of tzitzis likewise is limited to Tzemer Upishtan. So far, so good? And Abaye quotes Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Beged, Ein li ela beged Tzemer, Minayin l'rabos Tzemer Gemalim, V'Tzemer Arnovim, V'Notza Shel Izim, V'Aklach, V'Asrikin, V'Ashrirayim. Talmud Lomar O Beged. So the extra word O is a ribui to include all other materials. So let's just summarize. We have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Now we can add the Shita of Abaye. They hold that all materials, any kind of tzemer, it doesn't have to be made of sheep. It doesn't have to be the wool off the back of a sheep, of any other animal, and even feathers of a goat. All the above are chayiv in tzitzis. Whereas Rav Nachman holds there are only two garments that are chayiv in tzitzis. Hashirayim, Rashi says, is me'il shel meshi, which I think is silk. And Rav Nachman, the Omer Liel Shirayim Rabbanan Hu Dechayav. Rashi quotes an earlier sugya in which Rav Nachman is committed to the position that Shirayim is a beged for tzitzis midrabanan. On a doraisa level, you only need what? You're only chayiv when? If it's semer or fishtan. That's the shita of Nachman. And this derives from Tebei Rabbi Shmuel, the equation between tzitzis and kilayim. Kilayim is only in semer or fishtan. However, against Rav Nachman, we have the shita of Abaye, and Abaye, based on Tana Tebei Rabbi Shmuel, has an extra word o that includes all of these different kinds of materials on a doraisa level. How do we paskin? So this is one of those classic cases where you have machlokes in psak between the Chachmei Sfarad and the Chachmei Ashkenaz. We'll start with the Chachmei Sfarad, represented by the Rambam, but it's not just the Rambam, it's also the Rif and the Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch, and he paskins like Rav Nachman. Sus shechayev odom lasos b'tzitzis min haTorah. It means that tiak sus shel tzemer o pishton bilvad. Aval tala shel shar minim kegon bigdei meshi, bigdei tzemer gefen, which is cotton, bigdei tzemer gemalin, and tzemer narnovim. Notes shel izim v'chayusim ein chayom b'tzitzis ela midivrei chachamim. The Rosh, on the other hand, representing Chachmei Ashkenaz, quotes Rabbeinu Tam that the halacha is like Rava, who's the pasuk. Okay, we didn't see Rava, but Rava at the end of the sugya accepts the sheet of Rav Nachman that the mitzvah of tzitzit, the sheet of Abaye. Rava agrees with Abaye that from the word O, we have a ribui for all materials in the chayv and tzitzis doraisa. Rashi apparently in a tshuva accepted that view as well of Abaye and Rava. And now we have a machlokes between Chachmei Sfarad, who paskin that only Tzemer Upishtim are chayev in tzitzis on a deraisa level. All the others are chayev only midrabanan, as opposed to the Chachmei Ashkenaz, headed up by Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rosh. They paskin that no, that every single beged made out of any material whatsoever is chayev in tzitzis. So if you take a look in the Shulchan Aruch, representing Chachmei Sfarad, ein chayev b'tzitzis min haTorah lebeged pishtan od tzemer echelin. However, when he gets to the Ramah, and all the other minim are only d'Rabbanan, the Ramah says yesh omrim dekul chayovim d'oraisa v'hachi hilchasa. So the Ramah accepts the psak of Rashi Rabbeinu Tam and the Chachmei Ashkenaz, the Rosh, that you're chayev in tzitzis for all begotten. So let me ask you a question, Rabbi. Why are we learning this? It's my nafkamina. Either you're chayev midoraisa or you're chayev midrabanan. And you can't tell me that there's an nafkamina l'gabe bracha, because we make a bracha even on a mitzvah d'Rabbanan.
And also, it's not even doraisa. I mean, it's not even, you don't even have to do it.
Right,
Doraisa,
but I'm just saying, is it important to you to know that this pair of tzitzis, let's say cotton tzitzis, right, is doraisa or d'Rabbanan? Again, it's machlokas rishonim, but is that only what we call iyuni bilvad? You know, it's just a conceptual machlokas, it's theoretical, or is there lamaisa? So the Mishnah Berurah works very hard on this. He comes up with three nafkamina.
Would shatnez be an nafkamina? If it's only you're wearing a derabanan, can be over on shatnez by tzitzis?
How can it be over?
You're allowed to wear shatnez by tzitzis.
Yeah,
but is that only,
but
only if you're wearing a beged or
But I don't. Yeah, if you're
Yeah,
wearing, right, because it's not.
right.
I don't think there's an Easter Kilayim in cotton. So the Mishnah Berurah works very hard on this. He comes up with three nafkaminas. Number one, he wants to know what happens if you have a mixture of different chutim of tzitzis. They got mixed up together. Some chutim are kosher for tzitzis. That requires what's called tvil lishma, that it was woven for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzis. And other chutim that look identical, but yet they weren't woven l'shem tzitzis. And somehow he forgets exactly which are which. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if he has a suffix, then in a case of a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, if the mitzvah of tzitzis is d'Rabbanan in Shar Minim, which would be the sheet of the Chachmei Sfarad, then he could be Mekil. and he can rely on the fact that, amongst these tzitzis, there are tzitzis that are lishma, and they're kosher. But if, on the other hand, we accept the Ramah based on Chachmei Ashkenaz, that you're chayiv doraisa even on these begadim like cotton, etc., then in a suffix of this sort, we have to be machmir. Now, what does it mean to be machmir? It means two things. Number one, it means that you're going to have to make sure that there are tzitzis on that beged, even though it's a suffix. But number two, what it means is that you cannot rely on the assumption that the tzitzis that you're using are kosher, because you have a suffix about it. Then the Mishnah Berurah comes up with another fantastical nafkamina. What happens if you're in the middle of a public area and your tzitzis get caught and they rip? Now the halacha is you're not allowed to wear a beged of 4 knafos without tzitzis. Does he have to strip and take off the beged? And Daniel, that would be especially relevant back in the day if that was the main beged they wore. So we have a principle of gadol kavod habrios shedoche mitzvah derabanan or isa derabanan b'shevi altasa. And therefore, if we're talking about a pair of tzitzis that's only derabanan, then you would not be obligated to strip in the middle of the public eye because of kavod habrios. But if we're talking about a mitzvah doraisa, which generates an iser, so to speak, of not wearing a beged of talon kafos without tzitzis, now you find out you don't have tzitzis because they got ripped. You have to strip yourself of that beged even in the middle of Rishus HaRabim. And the Mishnah Berurah writes that lahalacha, we should be machmir like the first daya, that the Chachmei Sfarad will make that tzitzis out of pishton or tzemer. Do you hear this, Rabbi Osai? The Mishnah Berurah is advocating that you want to make sure and guarantee that you're fulfilling a mitzvah d'oraisa. Very interesting. I would have said, who cares? You have a mitzvah d'rabbanan, you'll fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa. No. You want to achieve the Torah mitzvah, so you want to wear tzemer. Now, what does that mean in a climate like ours? Or you're in Aventura, right? So it's quite hot, and you're going to schwitz away by wearing a beged of tzemer. You want to wear a beged of cotton. And the Mishnah Berurah is advocating, no. You want to fulfill the mitzvah tzitzis d'oraisa. Now, let me just ask you a question. This is like a game of association. And I guess with this, we'll have to conclude. What time is it? Oh, yeah. Game of association. It's a hot day, and the Mishnah Berurah is telling you to wear a beged shel tzemer, schwitz away, because it's d'oraisa, according to all Rishonim. What do you think the Chazon Ish is going to say? Just a game of association, like a knee-jerk response. If you lived in Bnei Brak, you know what I mean? Of course. I have a chiddush for you. The Chazon Ish says, don't wear a beged of tzemer. Why? He says that the mitzvah of tzitzis depends upon a levisha sheyesh ba hana. You have to enjoy the benefit of it. He says about himself, the Chazon Ish, when I walk out on a hot summer day, and Bnei Brak is pretty hot, and I'm wearing a beged shel tzemer, I don't enjoy that at all. There's no hanos levisha. And therefore, I'm not even fulfilling the mitzvah. At least if I wore a cotton garment, or cotton tzitzis, I would, according to Chachmei Ashkenaz, he'd be mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa. According to the Chachmei Sfarad, okay, he's only mekayim the mitzvah d'rabbanan, but at least he has a mitzvah. Fascinating, no? I always say that there's a misnomer about the Chazon Ish. I wrote an extensive article on Yichud, and the big makil in Yichud is the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish will allow a woman who's married to be alone with another man in her house when her husband is locked up in a hospital room with his feet up on top with what do you call it, a cast. And not only that, the Chazon Ish is making, people don't know this, with regard to Stam Yenom. If, let's say, a non-frum Jew would touch your wine, and there's an outstanding, very, very well spread chumrah, the Chazon Ish says, what are you talking about? The whole Isser of Stam Yenom is because of chasnus. There's no Isser chasnus with a non-religious Jew. And I can give you so many examples where the Chazon Ish was making. In fact, we eat strawberries. Many poskim say the only reason we eat strawberries is because of the Chazon Ish. Because other poskim would say that strawberries by definition are oral. There's no such thing as a strawberry that's not oral. Anyway, here's a case where the Chazon Ish was Mekil. He tells you don't wear a beged of tzemer during the summer months. And he takes.
They make this special tzemer, it's like cotton now,
Right.
it's amazing.
Yeah, you pay a lot of money for that. No, I bought a talus.
They
It cost
sell
me.
all over the place.
It cost me a lot of money.
It's because of the Hasidim. I
Okay.
remember going to a Hasidim thing, like event in Kolomon, Sukkot, and LA. It was a special.
I don't know, it doesn't feel like.
It was 100 degrees outside.
Wow.
And they were in their tzitzis, the world tzitzis,
Like the best.
their Bekishad and their shrine.
Oh, there was.
Kolomoy,
I see.
and it was like, I couldn't believe it.
This practice,
I was like, I was
amazing.
dying. I'm probably in my shorts or something like that, but they were like.
And Hasidim wear very, very long begotten.
Right, exactly.
So itchy.
Atzala was very busy.
So both I still want to learn a little bit more about tzitzis, if you don't mind, and we'll go through some of the sheets about the size of the tzitzis and different godim that you're not chayav in tzitzis and big dezeh and so
If
forth.
it's a, the rights is only to wear tzitzis. And to put on tzitzis if you have a four-corner garment.
Right.
Wouldn't that also be a factor here, that maybe that's what the Chazon Ish was made for, because if I'm not gonna wear, I wouldn't wear this garment. The Raisa, I shouldn't wear it if I wasn't gonna wear it, which would not make me have to wear it in person.
But I think the Chazon Ish is saying that even if tzitzis was a chiyuv, which it's not,
You have to wear.
he would still tell you not to wear it some because it's so hot that you're schwitzing away.
I was just thinking that, because like, with a lot of mitzvahs, we don't have to get hana in the mitzvah to do it, right?
Right, but here we learn from Kilayim, you only violate Kilayim if you get hana. For example, the Gemara has a case of a beged seller, right? He was a socher of begadim, and he wore begadim one on top of the other because that's how he transported them from place to place. And the Gemara says that even if it's Kilayim, there's no Isur, as long as he's not getting hana from.
Right.
And we have an equation between tzitzis and kilayim, and therefore the mitzvah of tzitzis only applies when you get hanof. Interesting, no? The reason why I was so excited about this Chazon Ish is because I want to dispel a certain image that we have about the Chazon Ish.
The funny thing is, like, all the modern svarim that people are writing,